The rushing waters of the Tennessee River carried more than fallen leaves that autumn morning in 1838. Hidden beneath the surface of what would become one of America's darkest chapters, a story of betrayal and redemption was about to unfold. When the soldiers came with their orders to remove the Cherokee from their ancestral lands, they brought with them a cruelty that would echo through generations. But sometimes, in the darkest moments of human history, unexpected heroes emerge from the shadows. Jailer. Sarah Running Bear never imagined that her morning walk to gather medicinal herbs would become a fight for her very survival. She never thought that the people who had promised protection would be the ones to throw her into the freezing waters to die. And she certainly never expected that salvation would come in the form of a Cherokee scout, whose own loyalty would be tested in ways that would change both their lives forever. This is the true story of abandonment and rescue, of betrayal and courage, of how one woman's will to survive and one man's decision to act against orders would create a bond stronger than the forces trying to destroy an entire people. It is a story that has been whispered around Cherokee fires for generations, passed down through families who refused to let such acts of humanity be forgotten. The waters were supposed to be her grave. Instead, they became the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would challenge everything both Sarah and her rescuer believed about loyalty, love, and the true meaning of home. Sarah Running Bear pressed her feet firmly against the familiar earth of her homeland, feeling the soft give of moss beneath her moccasins. The morning mist clung to the Tennessee mountains like the breath of sleeping spirits, and she moved quietly through the forest she had known since childhood. Her woven basket swung gently at her side as she searched for the wild ginseng and bloodroot that grew in these shadowed places. At 23, Sarah had become one of the most skilled medicine gatherers in her village, following the teachings her grandmother had passed down through generations of Cherokee women. The year was 1838, and the world Sarah knew was crumbling around her like autumn leaves. President Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act had set in motion a chain of events that would tear her people from the land they had called home for countless generations. The Cherokee Nation had fought the removal through every legal channel available, taking their case all the way to the Supreme Court. Chief John Ross had led delegations to Washington, speaking eloquently about their rights and their deep connection to this land. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed they had won when the Supreme Court ruled in their favor. But President Jackson had ignored the court's decision, and now the soldiers were coming. Sarah had heard the stories from other villages, families rousted from their homes with only minutes to gather their possessions, children separated from parents in the chaos of forced marches, elders who could not keep up with the brutal pace simply left behind to die. The Cherokee called it the trail where they cried, though the white soldiers had given it a different name entirely. As Sarah knelt beside a patch of bloodroot, carefully digging around the delicate roots with her bone knife, she tried to push away the fear that had been growing in her chest like a cold stone. Her village had been told they would have until the end of the month to prepare for removal, but trust in the government's word had been shattered too many times. She had seen the smoke rising from distant settlements and heard the sound of wagons and marching feet echoing through the valleys. The morning sun was climbing higher when Sarah heard the first sound that made her blood freeze. It was the metallic clink of harnesses and weapons, the heavy footsteps of many men moving through the forest with military precision. She pressed herself low behind a cluster of mountain laurel, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give her away. Through the gaps in the leaves, she saw them. A column of United States soldiers in their blue uniforms, led by a man whose face was set in grim determination. Behind them walked several Cherokee men, and Sarah's stomach clenched when she recognized them as some of the scouts who had agreed to help the army with the removal process. Her own people helping to tear apart the Cherokee Nation piece by piece. Among the Cherokee scouts, she spotted a familiar figure that made her breath catch in her throat. Running Wolf walked near the rear of the group, his face carefully blank, his eyes scanning the forest around them. Sarah had known him since they were children playing together by the river. He was 3 years older than her, the son of a respected warrior who had fought alongside Major Ridge before political divisions had split the Cherokee leadership. Running Wolf had always been caught between worlds, speaking English as fluently as Cherokee, understanding both white and Indian ways of thinking. 2 years ago, when the pressure to accept removal had intensified, Running Wolf had made the painful decision to work as a scout for the army. He claimed it was the only way to protect Cherokee families during the removal process, to ensure they were treated with some measure of humanity. Many in the village saw him as a traitor, but Sarah had always sensed there was more to his choice than simple betrayal. Now, watching him march with the soldiers toward her village, she felt a complex mixture of anger and sadness. She had once thought she might marry Running Wolf, back when the world made more sense and their biggest concerns were which crops to plant and whether the winter would be harsh. Those dreams belonged to a different lifetime now. The soldiers passed close enough that Sarah could hear their conversation. The commanding officer, a stern-faced man with graying hair, was speaking to one of the Cherokee scouts in clipped, impatient tones. "Tell me again about this village," the officer said. "How many families? Any resistance expected?" The scout, a thin man Sarah didn't recognize, replied in heavily accented English, "Maybe 40 families, Captain Morrison. Chief Bearpaw is old, not much fight left. Most families already pack, ready to go. But some young men, they talk angry words. Maybe cause trouble." Captain Morrison nodded grimly. "We'll handle any troublemakers. The order is clear. All Cherokee to be removed immediately for transport to the Indian Territory. Anyone who resists will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly." Sarah's blood went cold at the word immediately. They had been told the end of the month, but clearly the soldiers had different plans. She needed to warn her village that the soldiers were between her and home. If she tried to circle around them, it would take hours, and by then, it might be too late. She waited until the last of the column had passed before rising from her hiding place, her mind racing with options. The basket of herbs forgotten, she began making her way through the forest as quickly as stealth would allow, using every trick her father had taught her about moving silently through the woods. But as Sarah crested a small hill that overlooked her village, she realized she was too late. Smoke was rising from several cabins, not the gentle smoke of cooking fires, but the thick, black smoke of destruction. The soldiers had arrived before dawn, surrounding the village while everyone slept. From her vantage point, she could see families being herded into the center of the settlement, their belongings scattered around them as soldiers searched through everything of value. Sarah watched in horror as soldiers emerged from her own family's cabin, carrying her grandmother's medicine bundles and sacred objects. One soldier held up a Cherokee prayer feather, examining it with crude curiosity, before tossing it into a fire they had built from broken furniture. The casual destruction of something so sacred made Sarah's hands shake with rage. She could see her parents among the gathered villagers, her father's proud shoulders bowed in defeat, her mother clutching Sarah's younger brother to her chest. Where was Sarah? They would be frantically worried, not knowing if she had escaped or been captured elsewhere. For a moment, Sarah considered revealing herself, running down the hill to join her family in whatever fate awaited them. But another part of her, the part that had inherited her grandmother's fierce spirit, whispered that she might be more useful free than captured. If she could somehow get ahead of the column, maybe she could find help, or at least warn other villagers what was coming. Sarah began moving parallel to the village, staying hidden in the tree line when she heard voices approaching her position. 2 soldiers were walking up the hill, apparently to get a better view of the surrounding area for any Cherokee who might be trying to escape. "Can't believe how much junk these Indians accumulate," one soldier was saying. "Half of it's not worth the effort to burn." "Captain says we need to be thorough," the other replied. "Can't leave anything they might come back for. Make the removal permanent." Sarah pressed herself against the trunk of a large oak tree, trying to become invisible. But as the soldiers crested the hill, one of them spotted movement in the forest below. "Hey, there's someone down there in the trees." Sarah's heart stopped as she realized they had seen her. She broke from her hiding place and ran, crashing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs as the soldiers shouted behind her. Their heavy boots and equipment slowed them down, but Sarah knew they would soon call for help from the mounted soldiers below. She ran toward the river, thinking she might be able to lose them in the thick willows that grew along the banks. But as she broke through the tree line, she found herself facing not the empty riverbank she expected, but another group of soldiers who had been positioned there specifically to catch any Cherokee trying to escape. "Well, well," said a sergeant with tobacco-stained teeth. "Looks like we got ourselves a runner." Sarah tried to back away, but the soldiers from the hill caught up with her, cutting off her retreat. She was surrounded, trapped between the soldiers and the rushing waters of the Tennessee River. "Please," Sarah said in English, hoping to reach some spark of human decency in the men facing her. "I was just gathering medicine for my grandmother." "I wasn't trying to cause trouble." The sergeant laughed harshly. "Medicine, is that what you call it? Probably gathering poison to use against good Christian folks." Quote, he looked Sarah up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "Pretty little thing, though. Might be worth keeping around for camp duties." The other soldiers chuckled at the implication, and Sarah felt terror rise in her throat like bile. She had heard whispers about what happened to young Cherokee women who fell into the hands of certain soldiers, stories that were spoken in hushed tones around the cooking fires. "Sergeant Mullins," called a voice from behind the group. "What do we have here?" Sarah's heart leapt as she saw Running Wolf approaching, his face carefully neutral. Maybe he would speak up for her, help her somehow, without compromising his own position with the soldiers. But Running Wolf's next words shattered any hopes you might have harbored. "That's Sarah Running Bear," he said in a voice devoid of emotion. "She is the granddaughter of the old medicine woman. Always been a troublemaker, filling the young people's heads with stories about the old ways and resistance to white authority." Sarah stared at him in shock and betrayal. Every word he spoke was a lie, but the soldiers nodded as if they had expected as much. "Is that so?" Sergeant Mullins grinned. "Well, we know how to deal with troublemakers who poison minds against the United States government. What are your orders regarding her?" Running Wolf asked, and something in his tone made Sarah look at him more carefully. His face was still blank, but his eyes were intense, focused on the sergeant in a way that seemed oddly urgent. "Orders?" Sergeant Mullins spat. "Orders are to remove all Indians from this territory by any means necessary. As far as I'm concerned, this little wildcat fell in the river and drowned while trying to escape. Tragic accident, but these things happen during military operations." Sarah's blood went cold as she understood what the sergeant was suggesting. Running Wolf's face remained impassive, but she saw his hand move slightly closer to the knife at his belt. "Makes sense," Running Wolf said slowly. "Rivers are dangerous this time of year. Lots of hidden currents and rocks. Easy for someone to slip and hit their head, especially someone who's panicking and not thinking clearly." "Exactly," Sergeant Mullins agreed. "You Cherokee understand these things. That's why we need good scouts like you to help us manage situations like this." Sarah backed toward the water's edge, desperately looking for any chance of escape. The river was running high and fast from recent rains, but drowning seemed preferable to what the sergeant had in mind. At least drowning would be quick. "Well, let's get this over with," Sergeant Mullins said, signaling to his men. "Hold her down and we'll make it look convincing." Two soldiers moved towards Sarah, but before they could reach her, Running Wolf stepped forward.
"Wait," he said.
"There's a better way. If she drowns right here, the body might wash up downstream where other Cherokee could find it. Better to take her out to the deep water, where the current runs fastest." Sergeant Mullins considered this. "Good thinking, Scout. We'll take her out to that bend where the river narrows. Current's like a mill race there." Sarah felt the last of her hope drain away as the soldiers grabbed her arms. Running Wolf's betrayal cut deeper than her fear of death. She had been wrong about him, wrong to think there might be any good left in someone who could sell out his own people so completely. They marched her along the riverbank for nearly a mile, to a place where the Tennessee River curved sharply around a rocky outcropping. The water here was deep and fast, swirling in dangerous patterns that could drag down even a strong swimmer. Sarah could see why Running Wolf had chosen this spot. Anyone who went into the water here would have almost no chance of survival. "This'll do nicely," Sergeant Mullins said, looking out over the churning water. "Even if someone finds the body downstream, it'll just look like another Indian who couldn't handle the stress of removal. Happens all the time." The soldiers formed a rough circle around Sarah, while Running Wolf stood slightly apart, his expression unreadable.